Morning, everyone. BritSimon here. I want to explain to you how you can assess the performance of your embassy to determine whether or not your embassy is doing well, whether it's backlogged, whether you should consider moving, whether you should consider being patient. What's going on at your embassy. I've shown this method many times before on various live videos that I've done. But I thought it would be worth just recording this particular point so that I can make it clear and point someone to that video when they ask me this question. So this is your chance to learn how to do it. I've shown it before, and hopefully this video will be helpful to you and probably will educate some of the YouTubers out there that claim to know what they're talking about. So, everybody can be on the same page. All right, so let's bring up a web page. First of all, the site that you need to know, without a doubt, I mean, you can't go without knowing this site, is Zarthesius's site. So it's dvcharts.zarthesius.xyz. I'll put the link below this video on the YouTube channel, but this is the site that you need to go to, right? Okay, so in this site, you can toggle the menu if it comes in. If it comes in showing you this menu, you can toggle that. You can look at other years' data, but you're going to look at the 2025 data, right? And you're going to scroll down and you're going to want to see the view for your particular embassy, whichever embassy that is. Now, let's say you're at, let's just pick an embassy. I'll do Tbilisi. Okay, so let's say you're at Tbilisi and you come in here and you'll look at that and you say, okay, what does that mean? I've got all these cases. So what this is essentially saying is that between 1 and 2000, there were something just over 50 cases that were scheduled, right? And between 2000 to 4000, there were about 45 cases scheduled, and so on. You can see the number of cases scheduled at this embassy, and you can also see the performance in terms of where they issued, where they put on 221G and that sort of thing. But initially, you want to see how many cases per thousand are there, right? Now, depending on which regions you have selected, this will show either 1 to 2, a 2000 range, or it could show something different. So if we look at the EU range, here we go in my throat. If we look at the EU range, you'll see the scale down the bottom changes to being 1,000 blocks. So the numbers now have halved. And I can look at that and I can say, okay, first thing I can see is that this embassy seems to be booking around about roughly 25 cases per thousand, every 1,000, right? That's the first observation you should be making. How busy is this embassy? It could be much busier, it could be much quieter. That's not really the essential point, but that's the first thing you should instantly be able to see. The other thing that you can instantly look at is how many cases they scheduled for the first 5 months of the year, which is the January 1 number. That's the point at which we extracted the data on January 1, which was all scheduling up to the end of February, right? And so that's 5 months worth of interviews in that. So I did 321. I can divide by 5 and say, okay, I can see what they did. They did around about 60 cases per month, roughly, right? Just as a rough estimate. But then I can look at the next months, whenever that is. And right now, for example, we can see the cases that were scheduled in January, which are for March interviews, right? But you can do this at any time of the year, once we've got the data, of course. So they scheduled 25 cases, a little bit low. So they went a little bit lower than their average. First 5 months, they were doing around about 60 cases. And then they scheduled 25 cases. This shows the capacity that they set aside for DV cases on a month-to-month basis. And the capacity is very important, right? So, and we'd have to say, okay, they cut down their capacity, but have they got into a backlog situation? So we know how many cases they have per 1,000. You can see that there. But importantly, you can see also where they have reached in the region, Now, you can switch on any region here, and you can see this particular embassy has no cases for Africa, has one case for Asia, but clearly in Tbilisi is mainly about EU, right? Now, the visa bulletin for the month of March went up to 13,000 for EU, right? And Tbilisi has interviews all the way up to almost 13,000, I think 12,900 and something, right? So that's the biggest piece of information that you need to know. Is my embassy backlogged? I look at this and I say, okay, they went all the way up to 13,000, so they're not backlogged. Because if you understand what backlogged means they have not been able to keep up with the demand or with the number of cases that they had to schedule. They are behind, right? So the visa bulletin says they could have accepted cases up to 13,000 in EU, but perhaps they were only showing that they'd accepted cases up to 8,000. That would be backlogged, right? That difference between 8,000 and 13,000. In the case of Tbilisi, they're not backlogged at all, right? They had scheduled all the cases all the way up there. In which case, I'm less worried about the reduction of capacity, because this is probably not a statement about the capacity, but instead a statement about how many cases needed to be scheduled. They probably could have scheduled 40 or 50 or even 60 cases if 60 cases needed to be scheduled, but they went all the way up to the current number with only 25 cases. So in the case of Tbilisi, I am confident that the capacity isn't being strained, because they were doing 60 for the first 5 months, and now they just did 25. But with the 25 that they did in January for March interviews, they were able to get all the way up to the visa bulletin number for EU region, which means that they are not backlogged, right? And so if I were considering, if I were attached to the Tbilisi embassy, I would feel pretty comfortable right now, because they appear to have the best combination of not being backlogged and having adequate capacity, even to do more work if necessary. Okay, so that's Tbilisi. Let's have a look at another one. Let's have a look at another EU one. If we have a look at Paris, for example. Now, Paris, that looks like awful, right? Oh, it's like they've hardly done any cases at all. But again, if you look where they got to, they're up to 13,000. They're not backlogged, right? Simplest thing you can see right there is, oh, hang on a minute, they're not backlogged. That's great. If I click on the all, because they may have cases from Africa as well, in Africa, they got cases between 22,000 and 24,000. Okay, so maybe they're a little bit backlogged in Africa, but not very badly. If they got any cases in Asia, yeah, a couple, but nothing significant, right? But from an EU perspective, because this is an EU embassy, we would expect to look at the performance from its localized region, right? From an EU perspective, they scheduled cases right up to the 13,000, meaning that as an embassy, they are not backlogged. Now, they did that with only 7 cases being scheduled for the month of March, 3 from Africa and 4 from EU. So again, if you're attached to the Paris embassy, even though these numbers are very much lower, like over 5 months, they only did 57 cases. So there's only about 10 or 11 cases per month, and they only did 7 this month. But is it a problem? No, it's not a problem. It just means that they've got less activity going on at that embassy. Okay. Let's have a look at Addis Ababa. Some of you will want to know about Addis, right? And Addis is an embassy that has changed dramatically in terms of performance from last year to this year. We had the brilliant news, frankly, on January 1 that they had taken 932 cases, which told us that, yeah, they meant business, right? And then if we have a look at where the cases appear to, we can see that they took another 229 cases for the month of March, and they took those cases in January, obviously, and that took them, in terms of their cases, they reached the 22 to 24,000 range, probably somewhere in the middle of that, about 23,000. So they are a little bit backlogged, tiny bit backlogged, but doing very well. Okay, so I'm not worried about Addis right now. If they continue this sort of performance, that's absolutely great. Now, since we're on Addis for a moment, let's just talk about another aspect of this sort of analysis that you might want to do. You may have case number 30,000 and you're at Addis, right? And so you're 5,000 above the current visa bulletin, but you want to know if the visa bulletin went current to 30,000, would you be interviewed immediately? Does your embassy have capacity to get there? And so to answer that question, we need to know how many cases per 1,000 they are taking and what their capacity is, right? So if you look at this, you can just sort of estimate. You just look at this picture roughly and you guesstimate or estimate that this embassy takes around about, let's say, 95 every 2,000, 95 cases, maybe 100 cases every 2,000, right? So let's just, for round numbers, let's call it their cases per 1,000 is about 50 cases, right? Because this is around about 95 to 100 for every 2,000, right? So 50 cases per 1,000 in Africa, right? Let's say they're currently on about 23,000, roughly speaking. In order to get from 23,000 to 30,000, that would be 350 cases at the 50 cases per 1,000, right? And so if their capacity is going to be around about 220, let's say 250, what it means is that they can't get to 30,000 in the next visa bulletin or the next month of scheduling because they are slightly under capacity. Their capacity is slightly short of that. Now, if they suddenly say, hey, we've got enough capacity, we're going to take 400 cases, then they could catch up all the way up to 30,000 if that's the VB number we see next, right? And so you can begin to understand and predict when your case could be scheduled based on the capacity of your embassy and the number of cases it takes per 1,000, right? You can begin to predict that, which is how actually, if you want to predict month to month, you can do it this way. You can predict month to month visa bulletin activity using the method I'm describing right now. I don't do it. I generally find it's a little bit of a waste of time. I have my own thoughts on that, but if you're someone who is analytical and you want to work out all of the embassies in Africa, for example, to determine where Africa can get to, can it go to 40,000 next month? No. But if you want to know where it can get to in the next month's visa bulletin, this is the way you would work that out. You'd calculate that for some of the larger, more important visa processing centers, the embassies in that region. So you'd look at Cairo, you'd look at Addis, you'd look at Nairobi, and so on. So this is something you can do. You can calculate those numbers. Now, I've shown you so far 2 embassies I think that are doing well. One that is doing pretty well, just very slightly backlogged. Let me show you an embassy that is not doing well, and it was predictable that it was not going to do well. If we look at Ankara, now Ankara takes EU cases and Asia cases, right? So if we look first of all, where has it got to in EU? It's got to almost halfway through the 2,000 to 3,000 range, so it's about 2,500. They're current in EU up to 13,000, so that's very badly backlogged, right? It's been taking around about 65 to 70 cases per 1,000 in EU alone. And so in order to get to, let's say, case 10,000 in EU, they would need to see around about 750 appointments being made. The capacity that they gave between EU and Asia was 33 last month. And if they continue with this very low capacity, then they are going to continue being more and more backlogged. And that's basically what will happen with Ankara. Unless they have some sort of change of heart, they're going to cause a problem. We can look at the Asia numbers as well. Again, lots of Asia cases. These are mainly Iranian cases in Ankara, of course. And around about 90, almost 90 cases per 1,000 just of Iranian cases, right? So if we look at that and we combine those and just talk about the capacity, there's almost 300 cases per 2,000 or 150 cases per 1,000 between Asia and EU, and the capacity that they're taking won't even cover 1,000, right? It's below that. So that's a problem embassy. That's what a problem embassy looks like. Okay, so think about those things. Now, there's some other tools that you can use. Let me just show you a couple of other tools here. I want to show you this really good spreadsheet. So there's a super guy called Narek who has taken the data from Zarthisius's website, because, by the way, let me just show you. You can download all of this data in a file, right? If you look at that file, that is all the data available, and it's the data behind these visualizations. And you can see historically, Zarthisius kindly publishes those files for us, so you can see any point in time. So that's really good data if you want to have a look at it. But there's a guy who is taking that data and plotting that into into a spreadsheet, so you can kind of see all of the embassies kind of side by side, right, to see who's doing well. And you can have a look for your embassy. So at the top here, we've got the names of the embassies, or the three-letter abbreviation for the embassy. And you can scroll across and you can see, okay, there's Algeria, for example. What are they doing? Well, within Africa, they're taking cases, let's say, 34, 29, 27. This is per 1,000, right? So what Narek has done is he's broken that data down and shown how many cases precisely between each number range, so that we can see whether they're right up to whether they're backlogged or not, right up to the visa bulletin number, and how many cases they're taking per 1,000. You can do the same analysis from this spreadsheet, in other words. And you can see, for example, Algeria has taken 19 cases between 24 and 25,000, meaning they're not backlogged, right? Maybe backlogged a tad, like a couple of hundred numbers, but not backlogged at all, really. You can see that Addis, for example, is showing numbers there between 22 and 23,000, but no numbers, no case numbers between 23 and 24. So that's a very, very minimal backlog, right? As I just showed in the other side, right? And you can scroll across and see more of these. Let's have a look at some of these. If I scroll back up to the EU range, we can see some of those. You can do this for any region. You can see that Narek has broken this down into where there's embassies that take cases from multiple regions. He's broken it down, which is brilliant. We can see BKK there. They're right up to date, no backlog, right? Because it's an EU embassy. Bombay has taken Asia cases up to 6,000, which is correct. That's the visa bulletin number. And African cases up to 25,000. So BMB, Bombay, is not backlogged at all. That's a good embassy to be at. We can continue across and see some of these. Let's look at Cotonou, for example, right? Just picking on that one randomly. Africa region embassy, so we expect to see African cases, and we're seeing them right up to 23 to 24,000. So they've scheduled that correct number of cases, and again, they have a very, very tiny backlog, very small. But I'd be pretty happy if I was at Cotonou right now. I would not be looking at moving, right? Cairo, again, not backlogged at all, especially once you consider the Egypt accept number. That's really good. Barely backlogged at all, if at all, which is excellent, right? CSB, Casablanca mainly takes African cases, but also takes occasional cases from Asia in EU, but nothing to really sort of write home about. But in Africa, it's taking cases from 20 to 21,000, so slightly backlogged, but they're taking a huge number of cases. So I'm not worried about Casablanca. I think they're going to be doing fine, right? Now, where else have we got cases? Let's see. Let's have a look in just one more. We'll look at Frankfurt here. So they've got cases from Africa, Asia, EU, and Oceania. And you can see that for EU, which is their most likely region, they've got cases right up to the 13,000. And then they've got one case at Africa. Does that mean they're backlogged? No, it doesn't mean they're backlogged. It just meant that they didn't have any cases for that embassy from Africa. I'd say that's not a backlogged embassy right now, because you can see that for their own region, they're right up to 13,000. So not a problem. So you can have a look at this data and study that data very easily in the spreadsheet. You can do it in Zarthisius's website. You can do it just the same in this spreadsheet. Whichever way you feel is more interesting, more more useful to you. I would look at both if I were you, but that's how you can assess the performance. So is your embassy backlogged? You can see that very simply on these sites. Is your embassy taking cases on a monthly basis? What's their capacity that they're showing? How does that capacity compare to DV 2024, by the way? You can go and have a look at the DV24 page in Zarthisius's site, and you can see whether they were taking higher capacity last year. And then also, how many will they have to take in order to get to a certain case number that you're at, for example, and whether that's likely or not, okay? So you can work all of those things out. You can make an educated guess for yourself. You don't have to ask me to do it, and you don't have to listen to dopey people that don't understand what they're talking about. You can do this for yourself. This is very simple. Okay. All right, everybody. I'm hoping that was useful for you. Please let me know if there's anything that you don't understand. You can email, not email me, but you can post questions at BritSimonSays.com. I don't take questions by email or private message. So best place to ask me questions is on my blog, BritSimonSays.com. But please do give me a thumbs up if you liked this video, if it was helpful, and let me know what you think. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.